We've been riding the same horse for 20 years and now you've got a new horse. Like that's a big change. And
can you talk us through the old tradition of the bridle horse?
Oh man, we don't have enough time for that. I like horses that are forward and sensitive.
Ben, I want to ask you, what do you think makes a great leader as a horseman?
Consistency, clarity, empathy. The culture of each place is different. Each ranch has its own vibe, I guess you could say it. That'd be the modern word for it. But
what does it take to be a great leader? And what makes a brilliant ranch horse? Well, Ben Longwell, who was born and raised in Colorado, USA, is the horse trainer and clinician at True West Horsemanship. Ben has always had a deep-rooted passion for truly understanding the horse and the old tradition of the Vaquero bridle horse, which has been the base for his teaching better horsemanship and helping build stronger partnerships between horse and rider. He lives on a working ranch with his wife Natalie, and together they give thrilling, educational and atmospheric ranch tours. So what is the key to a successful three-way relationship between horses, humans and cattle? Let's jump in and find out, shall we?
Ben, welcome to Curious Equestrian.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
And for our worldwide listeners, and me included, who have always been fascinated with ranch life, can you take us back in time, Ben, to you as a child and what that was like growing up with horses and cattle and what it was like around the ranch?
Well, it was just the way that we did things. I guess anytime you're growing up, you don't know any different, and each of us has our own story with that. But for me, one of the first experiences I remember being horseback, I must have been about 5 or 6. And I thought I pretty well had it figured out. I was getting to that point, and this mare ran off with me and just decided to quit the show on what we were doing. And she just took off, and she wasn't actually probably running. She was probably just trotting, but it was pretty scary. It set me back a ways in terms of me thinking I was the man on that deal. And so that's one of my first memories of being horseback, was having this mare just trot off and ignoring me. But, I guess it was something I always loved. I loved being outside. I loved being around the animals, and I loved making things easier for everything to happen. I guess, growing up, I didn't realize what my philosophy was or how I was thinking about it. I couldn't have expressed it, but I always wanted to set things up to be better for the horses and the cattle, and to see if we could get them to think, I guess, for us in doing what we were trying to do with them. And again, I couldn't have expressed that or verbalized it, but it was something that was in me even as a kid.
And I was going to ask you, could you pinpoint a certain moment, Ben? But was it a horse that sort of ignited you to go on that mission, on your own personal journey, to seek deeper connection with the cows and the cattle, with the cattle and the horses?
It was not a specific moment. There's been a lot of moments, I suppose, and experiences. I started my first young horse when I was about 15, and kind of just by trial and error, trying to figure out things. And I did the best I could at the time, but I enjoyed it, and I loved being around him. But the main thing I've always enjoyed is having a purpose for the riding, having a job to do where you're going somewhere or you're doing something horseback. And I think the horses pick up on that. They don't always understand the extent of the job or what have you, but they certainly can follow our intent on things, and they know when we've kind of got a mission, and they know when we're kind of done, just by the way we behave ourselves while we're doing those things. But it would have been in my early 20s that the lights really came on for me in terms of horsemanship and how different the way I was raised to what it could be. And I got the opportunity to spend a bit of time with a quarter horse breeder and trainer in Western Colorado, a couple hours south of where I grew up. And he had spent some time with Grant Gallagher, who had spent some time with Tom Dorrance, and so there's kind of that lineage of that style of horsemanship, and just really the revolution of horsemanship around the world could be attributed mostly, I think, to Tom Dorrance. And so it was just a real pivotal moment or season in my life. That I spent almost a year there, and we were starting colts and halter training weanlings, and just got immersed in that. And there was early on in that experience, Mike pulled me aside, and we just had a session in the round pen, and he said, you're good at this. You could do this. And I don't know, that just kind of hit me because, I'd never heard people say that about me very much, and I thought, well, that's kind of something. And so that kind of always stuck with me. And I've doubted that many times through the years and the journey, because it's never easy, but that was a pretty pivotal moment in my life.
And how important do you think it is that for you, but for all of us, that we find a mentor at a particular time in our life when we need it most often, and actually to set us on the right journey?
Absolutely. I think it's super important. I don't think it can be overemphasized how much time it can save for us to seek out the wisdom of those who have gone before us and learn from those, who are doing the work or have done the work and put in the hours and made the mistakes. And we all have to make our own mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes if we're going to try to become something more than what we are. And that's just part of the process of growing and pushing out into those things. But I know for me, there's been times when I didn't feel like I had a good mentor, and seasons where, especially in New Zealand, it was real isolated. There were not a lot of good clinics or anything to go to for a long time. And I read a lot and I study a lot, but to have that one-on-one or where you got eyes on you, where it's face to face and live action it's irreplaceable. So it's a pretty important thing. And I think as people do that, as they make that part of the way they purpose to make progress, there's a lot to be said for having that mentor come alongside you, and you're just gonna accelerate a lot faster.
And Ben, hearing those words in your early 20s very unexpectedly, how did you then take the steps to take that path? For someone to say you could do this, you've got a gift, you've got a natural talent, how do you then take the steps to be your own horseman and to advise others and actually eventually become a mentor to many others across the world?
For me, it was a pretty roundabout trip. These things don't happen in a straight line, and you can never foresee, what it's going to look like or how it could shape up. I ended up moving back to my hometown, and I was starting, I bought a colt of my own to start, and I was riding a few horses for other people and just doing some day work for different ranches in the area like I had done before. And a fellow came and looked at the horse that I had for sale. He really liked him, liked what I'd done. And he didn't buy him, but he said, "Would you like to come ride colts for me?" And so he had gotten to a point where he didn't want to be getting on the young ones straight away. And if I put 30 to 60 days on him, then he would take him and ride him another 36 to 60 days. And he dealt with all the clients, and he dealt with all the hay and all the logistics and stuff. And I just started colts. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. It was just the easiest, most straightforward job I could imagine, but that was
not all people would say that, Ben. Not all would say that.
Well, no, it's true, but on the one hand, it was straightforward, but on the other hand, I wasn't getting any experience at running a business. I wasn't getting any education on the logistics or on dealing with the people or on anything else. But it was still a good education. I still got around a lot more horses and started to do it. And so I did that for a while, a couple years, and had met and married Natalie at the same time, and we ended up moving up to Wyoming. So we were on a big ranch up in Wyoming for a bit, and it just was that kind of journey where just one thing led to another. When we had gotten married in New Zealand, I'd started a couple of Arabian horses down there for the president of the endurance racing club, and
Wow.
he had said, he'd said right then, wow, you've done a good job. You could do this. You could make a living down here doing this. And I just, it was in one ear and out the other for me at that point, because we had already planned to live in the States, and I never thought much about that. But, come full circle, coming from Wyoming, we moved to New Zealand, and that's where all my kids were born. That's where we started True West Horsemanship. And I made a living working with horses and teaching clinics down there for 11 years. So you just never know, how it's going to shape up. It's been an interesting journey, and I never would have imagined that I'd lived overseas or had that kind of experience.
And what was that like culturally shifting? And with the horses, was it a big difference and a big leap when you made the move?
There was a lot of differences and, kind of culture shock. I had traveled enough to know the differences in some different cultures. I've been in Asia and different places, and you expect it there. It's to be expected. But when you go to New Zealand and you think, well, that's much more closely related culturally, but there's these subtle things. And when it came to the horses, it was obviously very much more English discipline focused. And so a lot of eventers and show jumpers and dressage and endurance and a lot of these types of events and disciplines that I had never been around. And so I had to learn how to communicate, not only how to communicate better to people, because I had done a limited amount of, working with people beyond just working with their horses. And so I was on a steep learning curve to learn how to communicate to people, whether it's a private lesson or it's an owner that I'm starting a horse for, or it's a clinic. I had to learn how to communicate to people. And then I also had to learn how to speak a different language in terms of terminology and the English terms and what these riders are looking for, what they're trying to achieve in their disciplines, and how horsemanship being, a language of horses, a way of being around horses that fits the horse, then how is that going to help them, right? It isn't a Western thing. It isn't a cowboy thing. It isn't it isn't just for colt starting. It's for horses, and it's for horses of any breed, any discipline. And it doesn't matter what tack you put on them or what you plan on doing, as long as it's something they can do, And so I had a pretty steep learning curve. It was 6 months in to our time in New Zealand when the first National Horse Expo there was being run. And I guess we'd been in business maybe 3 or 4 months when my wife put my hand up to present there at that National Horse Expo. And it wasn't something that I probably ever would have pushed for myself to do. But 6-7 months into our journey there, I found myself on the national stage for presenting on horsemanship and colt starting. And again, steep learning curve and just out of my depth, but that's where you grow, and that's where you sink or swim, so to speak, And so that was a huge boost to what we were doing and to being able to get clinics going further afield across the country.
And Ben, I've got to ask you, because, and you talk about it being a steep challenge, but for those who listen to your podcast, like I do, will know that you mentioned that when you were a child, you could barely string a sentence together and you were quite quiet, and that you could never foresee being a public speaker. How on earth did you go from being this little quiet child to someone who's a confident presenter, essentially, in the world of horsemanship and mentor on stage and screen? Was that difficult to get into the role of, Ben, for you?
Yes, it was. And sometimes it still is. I faced it every day. I learned how to cope with nerves and butterflies in the stomach, on a regular basis, and pushed myself to face that and to do the thing that I was scared of, to do the things that I was uncomfortable doing. And I found that the more I did it, the easier it became. The more familiar I became with my subject matter, my familiarity with the process that I'm looking for with the horses, whether it's a problem solving situation or a young horse that we're starting or whatever it is, being able to express that clearly in ways that most people understand, or even being able to change the way I'm saying things so that different people can understand, and it just has been day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, pushing into that. And again, one of those things, again, I never would have visualized or could have seen, but these things don't happen overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day. And that's the way growth is, right? It's uncomfortable, but if you grow, then that thing becomes more comfortable. And then you grow a little more, and that's uncomfortable, but you're growing, and then that becomes comfortable. And so on and so forth.
And that is so inspiring to hear, for so many who maybe they don't have confidence public speaking, speaking in front of audiences, or maybe it's another area of their horsemanship or their life even. And actually to hear your story and how you really persevered and you really crafted your on-stage presence, to know that it isn't just something that you snapped into on stage because you had to, you actually worked at it, is so inspiring. I think particularly at a time, and I'm sure you might agree, Ben, with this, at a time where reality shows and social media can make people go viral in an instant, and suddenly they go from being a normal person sharing a passion online, or becoming new on TV on a reality show, and then suddenly they're doing book tours and talking about their success on YouTube or whatever it might be with their thousands of followers. So to actually hear about the slow and steady wins the race and crafting the art of speaking and delivering presentations and working with horses, that it isn't a quick fix and it isn't something you can just become good at overnight, is really motivational, and I love that. And I've got to ask you, Ben, from one public speaker to another, how do you do clinics and demos and deliver a presentation with a horse that is also super unpredictable? Because it's one thing delivering a talk to an audience, but it's another thing, and I've always wondered this, running a clinic with a horse that actually thinks, well, I'm not going to necessarily listen to you today. How do you deal with that moment of potential chaos working with a new horse in front of a live audience and its owner?
Again, it's just one of those things that as you practice, you develop, and there's timing in there, right? There's timing of things that are happening that you want to say something about, things that are happening that you want to say something about, and you don't have time to, adjustments that need to be made to what you're doing with the horse based on how he's responding or not. And at the end of the day, it needs to be real. It has to be authentic. And so it's not a show. It's not to, wow anybody. I'm not a showman. So if the horse is doing whatever he's doing and he needs me to change my approach or adjust what I'm doing to get a different idea across to him, that's exactly why we're there, is to learn how to communicate better. And so I don't worry too much if they, don't do what I ask them to. It's like, that's all part of the process for everybody who's watching, including myself, to learn how to communicate better and to roll with whatever's going on, And so I don't set up any big expectations about, that people should have these big expectations about what's going to happen. It's more like, how can we learn to communicate better? And this horse is going to give us the opportunity to do that, whether he does exactly everything we ask him to do, or if there's all these little bumps along the road and he's got, issues with what we're doing. It just doesn't matter one way or the other. But I tell you what, the timing aspect of it is tricky, because there's never enough time to narrate and discuss what I'm doing, what he's doing, and why while it's happening. And then by the time you get done and you get to a spot where you can release and he's soaking, then you sort of recap and you're talking about what just happened or what, and even then you kind of forget half of what was going on in your head a minute or two ago, but you can start to see things happen. The way I put it is, and it's the same thing with just working with the horses, is you can see what's about to happen before it happens sooner. And that's something that Ray Hunt always talked about, was your timing needs to get better, and you need to see what's about to happen before it happens. And it's like it's happening in slower motion, and things that caught me off guard or surprised me 10 years ago or 20 years ago, they don't do that as often, right? I don't get caught out as often or end up being late to the party because I can see things shaping up a little better. And that's just experience. That's all that will build that, is just paying attention, observing the details, and getting that experience.
And is that, Ben, reading the body language of the horse? Do you think it's also part instinct?
You know, it's definitely reading the body language. It's definitely banking on previous experience and having seen, we've watched this movie before, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But also it becomes instinctive, because if it's your life and it's what you spend your life doing, I think it becomes so ingrained in a person. It's no different than a ballerina or a sharpshooter or whatever. You spend your life perfecting that as best you can to become a master, as we all would hope to become someday. Then, I don't know, instinct might be the right word for it to some degree.
And I've got to ask you, Ben, can you talk us through the old tradition of the bridle horse and how you think it helps make better horsemanship?
Oh man, we don't have enough time for that. Okay. So,
in as much of a nutshell as you can give us, Ben.
The bridle horse, the old tradition of the California Vaquero bridle horse, was rooted in the classical equitation of Europe. And so it had all the practical maneuverability of the highest level dressage horse. All those moves were practiced for practical reasons in those days, that being warfare or fighting bulls, right?
Wow.
Bulls that were bred to kill you. And so even the cattle, like if you're just out there in the Mission era of California, there was a lot of cattle out there, but they were pretty wild, and they were longhorns, And so the accuracy, the maneuverability, the athleticism all had a practical purpose. Unfortunately, modern dressage has tried to hang on to those principles, but lacks the purpose for most of those horses and riders. And then you had amazing developments in that time of the horned saddle and the roping, right? And the way of handling cattle with ropes to do what you needed to do with them. And so then you combined that whole skill set, and that evolved alongside that high level of riding and horsemanship. And so to me, it's the bridle horse is potentially the best, highest level of riding and horsemanship there is, because it doesn't borrow from Western and English. It is the roots of Western and English. Like the roots of all of our modern disciplines in Western civilization, are at the core of what the bridle horse is meant to be.
Wow. And how do you incorporate that, Ben? Did you learn it growing up, or is it something you went on the investigation to educate yourself with? Where did it come into your life?
It came in gradually as well. It was not the way I grew up riding or working with horses. I didn't know what a hackamore was until I was in my late teens. And I just gradually became more and more interested in it. And I love history, and I love learning about how we came to be where we're at, whether that's in the horse industry as a whole or here in the American West and ranch horses versus the performance horses, and then the crossover where now we've got ranch versatility and we've got ranch trail, we've got all these ranch competitions, and it's like this big mixing pot. But how did we get here, and where are we missing the roots and the values and not just tradition for the sake of tradition, but the important things and the things that worked for good reason 2 or 3 or 400 years ago, Yes, we've gotten smarter. Yes, we've made technological advances, but we've also lost a lot of knowledge along the way. So it's been my pursuit to dig that stuff out and to seek out those that do, to learn from them as well. And so it's been 20 some years that I've been interested in that tradition, and making that kind of the foundation of the way that I ride and the way that I encourage people to ride, because it doesn't actually, you don't have to be making a bridle horse to ride this way. You don't have to be riding in a hackamore or learning how to rope or even working with cattle to ride with some of those roots of classical equitation and a better feel for your horse.
And how does it feel to be part of bringing that tradition back and to sort of spreading awareness and making it come alive again, and to make sure it's not forgotten for future generations? Does that give you great purpose in your work, Ben?
It does. I mean, you probably saw my eyes light up when you asked the question originally about the bridle horse. And it's just, I can't believe how close we came to losing the entire thing, along with other pieces of history and knowledge that humanity has lost and discarded along the way. By the middle 1900s, this tradition was almost non-existent, except for isolated ranches in the Great Basin. And, you know, if it wasn't for Tom Dorrance and Ray Hunt, I don't know if it'd still be around, because those guys were buckaroos. That's what they did. And so they unearthed much better ways of getting around horses and communicating, but their roots were still in the working stock horse and the bridle horse tradition. And so right on the heels of this revolution in horsemanship around the world that we see, people get interested in communicating better, but a lot of times they also get interested in this style of riding, this style of gear, and the practicality of it, which I can't emphasize enough. Brings purpose to what you're doing, and just people and horses thrive on that, you know, that practical purpose. So I don't know, I'm real excited to be a part of it. In New Zealand, we were on the cutting edge of bringing that tradition and awareness back into that country, not even back into that country, but to that country for the first time. And along with a couple of other real passionate folks down there, we helped produce the New Zealand Vaquero gathering for a number of years, and we would get together and give people a chance to ride. And it was a clinic type setting, but real relaxed. And we'd have cattle to work, and we'd teach them how to rope, and we'd talk about the craftsmanship of the rawhide braiding and the silversmithing. And it was a pretty cool deal. Yeah.
Wow. And I can imagine you get interest worldwide, Ben, on all aspects. Like you say, not only the horsemanship side, but the lifestyle element as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of folks, I think a lot of folks just follow even just for the lifestyle element. And I get questions from riders all over the world. I always tell people at my clinics, you make sure if you got a question, you get in touch with me, because I answer questions from total strangers all the time. So you can bet I'm going to answer your questions, you know.
Brilliant. And Ben, what I love as well is you mentioning that the craftsmanship behind it, because horsemanship is a craft of sorts. And so did you mention silversmithing and the other elements?
Yes.
What was it, the other elements that go hand in hand as part of what you used to teach?
You know, there's rawhide braiding. There's obviously leather craft and tooling, saddle making, you know, these types of old world craftsmanship that, again, you know, by the 70s, a lot of these things had started to die out. And there's been kind of an intentional push towards educating younger generations from since then through the 80s and 90s. And now it's got this wave. There's this momentum, I think, that we see throughout this world, this part of the culture, where young people are interested in building saddles and learning silversmithing and, you know, learning how to work with horses. And so it's an exciting time, because again, 40, 50 years ago, you know, we had let these things slide to the edges of the industry, and you could buy a bit made in China for, you know, $50 and slap it in your horse's mouth and away you go. But there's something to be said about the hands-on, handmade quality craftsmanship that goes into some of these tools. So
And how inspiring to hear that there is a push and a move and an interest in that, because actually, you know, as you mentioned, hundreds of years ago, this ranch life, as you mentioned, the horsemanship, the leather craft, the braiding, rawhide, silversmithing, building saddles was the whole part of the, all part and parcel of the ranch. And everyone, no doubt, would be round that fire, talking, singing, banging a drum, humming a tune, playing a harmonica, whatever it might be, playing a guitar. Community, conversation, arts and
Yeah,
crafts, getting your hands stuck in. And now look at us all, and I don't know, I can't speak for your community out there, Ben, but we look around here and, you know, no one talks. In pubs, everyone, you know, is in their separate circles. People, and this might shock you, Ben, in our local schools, you know, when you go in to do talks, children don't really know how to draw anymore because they're just always on their phones, their tablets, their iPads, their computers. They've lost the practice and the art of drawing even. So to hear that people are
wow,
trying to move back to that way of life of actually, let's get stuck in with arts and crafts, let's learn some old traditional trades, you know, let's learn a
yeah.
different way of life, is so inspiring to hear, and it offers a bit of hope, doesn't it, for the future generations?
Absolutely. It really does. And it brings us back to the more important things in life. And community is one of those where we're in something together and we don't have to know what's going
Mm.
on, you know, on the other side of the world right now. We need to get locally connected and rub shoulders and build relationships face to face and accomplish something together, you know. That's what it's about.
Mm. And do you think, Ben, is it the same for you where you are, that people are seeking this out because of the sort of insular societies we're now living in, do you think?
I think there is that going on for sure. There still is a Western culture that's alive and well, and the young people that are
Mm.
raised in it are different than the ones that you see elsewhere or that you run into in the city or what have you. There's still values, there's still traditions, and there's still respect for your elders. There's still these core values that have always been there, but it's still a slippery slope, and it's still, you know, technology is still taking over, and like you say, the
Mm.
isolation, it just happens, and I've seen it even in the places I've lived, you know, where you might not really meet your neighbor. I moved to a new place and you know, might not meet my neighbor for a year or two, you know, whereas it used to
Mm.
be like everybody would just welcome you into a new neighborhood or, you know, a ranch area, you know, and it's just more and more isolation all the time, I think.
And I think that is what we all think. I mean, it's what we imagine here. Certainly I do here in England. We think of a ranch and we think of community and conversation and warmth and a warm welcome and all of that. And do you think that is, Ben, as we would imagine it here in England? It's hard to know what we're seeing in TV and film if it's just stereotypical. But is that the case? Is there really a sense of sort of community and people coming together to share in a love of horses? And is it as pure as that, or do you get sort of a bit of a backlash and confrontation too?
You'd go both ways at different times for sure,
Yeah.
but I would say by and large, there still is a very hospitable culture here, and and quite welcoming, especially if when you come in wanting to learn and wanting to be, you know, wanting to be open and you know, there's not hardly anybody that won't at least give you the time of day, you know. But I know I found we've brought groups over from New Zealand for a lot of years, and then just last year kickstarted our escorted ranch tour again, to Nevada this time, and basically it's welcome to all international or riders that, you know, basically can't afford to bring their own horse all the way to Nevada, and we provide horses. It's an all inclusive tour, and just an amazing educational cultural adventure, like, you know, like you might go to Zimbabwe and you want a native guide and you want to see the real deal and that sort of a thing. It's kind of similar to that because it's not a dude ranch, it's a working cattle ranch. We go out and get the job done. We take you to the best tack stores, the best restaurants, you know, this sort of thing.
Wow.
And people constantly say, this is not the America that I see on TV. This is not LA or New York. This is
Mm.
incredible. The people are so kind, so much hospitality, and such a rich history and culture, you see. And so I'd say, while there is the technology and the isolation and just
Mm.
a changing society, there's still a lot of traditional culture here.
And Ben, you have to forgive me for sounding throughout this interview far too English about my assumptions of ranch life, but I do find it so fascinating. And since I was a teenager, I've
Absolutely.
wanted to come out and it was my dream at 18 to come out and do, 6 months on a ranch. And then when I realised, careers taking off and everything like that, I thought, oh, maybe I could do 6 weeks on a working ranch in Wyoming. This was what I wanted to do for years. But obviously, as your career takes a leap forward, I could never take that
Yeah.
break of time to, like, my friends went traveling, but I never could. So it's still on my bucket list. I
Right.
will do my tour around Southern America and I will get out on a working ranch and experience it for myself. But for now, I'm living through YouTube, through film and TV. But can you just paint us that picture, Ben? When you step on the ranch, on your working cattle ranch, what is it like? Describe for us what could we see? What can we smell? What's the atmosphere like? What is that culture like?
Well, it's early, not quite daylight, and maybe you got some horses to gather up, so has everybody got something to ride? And so you saddle up one that you left in the corral the night before. And it's kind of chilly, so he humps up a little bit when you saddle him. But he's pretty good, so you turn him in a circle a couple of times and step on and trot out to find where the remuda is. And well, if you're like me, you like the mountains, so there's probably some trees around, some ponderosa pine or Douglas fir, and about this time of year, everything's green. There's wildflowers popping up everywhere, and of course you spot the horses from pretty far off, but you got to climb up to get them. It's nothing's flat, and you round them up, and they kind of know the way, they know the deal, and you want to bring everything in, even though you don't need it. That way, they don't get in the habit of thinking they can sneak off and get left behind. Your dog can help a little bit, but you don't want your cow dog chasing horses, so you kind of keep him in behind you. And you bring him down to the barn and get him in the corrals, and you start catching a few. You might have had breakfast, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but kind of get everything saddled and figure out what the day's like. Sometimes it'll be everybody's horseback, sometimes it'll just be, nobody's horseback. It just depends on what the job is, but there's something about that, just that first crack of daylight and that fresh air and a little bit chilly, but it's going to warm up, and I guess the culture of each place is different. Each ranch has its own vibe, I guess you could say it. That'd be the modern word for it. But, the best places are the ones where everybody's on the same page and there's good open communication. And it's just like what I said before about being in community. You're accomplishing something bigger than yourself. And you're doing that through teamwork and a common goal and common vision. And most likely you're all doing it because you love doing it, right? You're not there to get rich. You're not there to, make a name for yourself. You're doing it because you love the work and you love the life. And so it puts you in this common ground with pretty much everybody else. There's just nothing quite like it.
Oh, that was beautiful, Ben. That was actually very relaxing to listen to as well. I could take myself there and just imagine actually that, all the stresses are far, far away and you're out on the ranch, out in the country with lots of like-minded people, it sounds like. And one day I will do it. So thank you, Ben, for giving us a couple minutes of inspiration there and escapism from reality. And it does feel like that, it really does. And I think there is a real, and I don't know whether it's because of what we see on TV and film, but for us English people over here, I think maybe because our riding school and yard and livery cultures over here seem so far from that. And hopefully I can speak on behalf of of English riders when I say that it can be very difficult on an English yard. It's very, how do I say, very
Uptight.
competitive, uptight. That's the word, uptight. You know, the most anyone might do is stand around and have a cup of tea, but even then it can be that small talk. It can be competitive. Is someone sort of trying to stab you a bit in the back whilst also telling you what you really should be doing with your horse? It can be like that. Of course, not every place, I must say, before we get loads of haters in the comments saying, Anna, my livery yard and my riding school's lovely. Obviously, you know, every place is different. But generally speaking, that is what it is like over here. So I think, you know, many of us do dream of just having a bit of wilderness and a bit of a wildlife out on the ranch. But Ben, you did allude to the fact that actually you were a horseman before you were a human man, a people person, should I say, and that actually that brings
Yeah.
many struggles. How have you adapted to working with people? Because so many say, and I know my farrier will say it, that actually the problem isn't the horse, it's the human behind the horse. How have you learnt to deal with people and their egos?
You know, I've been pretty fortunate to attract people, for the most part, that don't have too much ego. And I guess for me, I always try to be diplomatic. I always try to, let people come to their own conclusions as to, whose fault it is. But I don't blame. I just sort of want people to see that if the horse is having a problem, how have we set it up that that's their understanding? And how have we set it up that that's been their experience? And then how do we change that? And so again, I'm fortunate that most of the people that come to me are already understanding how they want to be better, and that they're taking responsibility. Matter of fact, sometimes almost too much responsibility, where they almost want to blame themselves for everything, when it's like, yeah, you can do this. You don't have to just be down on yourself all the time. But I just think it's important that, number one, we set up a learning environment where it's open and you can ask questions. I'm not going to yell at anybody. I don't embarrass anybody. And that way people can feel free to say something or ask why, or have me repeat something. And I never, ever make a big deal about that. I'll say things over and over and over again. I'll say them in different ways, and I'm never going to embarrass anybody. And so I make sure everybody knows that right out the gate. And then, by the end of the first morning in a clinic, people can see that that's the way it is. And often there's people that have been there before who are promoting discussion or asking good questions. And the more open we can have it, the more we're going to all learn from each other.
And Ben, I've got to ask you, we've touched on the fact that obviously you live on a working ranch with cattle, and we so focus on our horsemanship, but what is it like bringing in that relationship with the cattle into the equation? And how do the horses interact with the cattle? For those of us who haven't seen that dynamic, round here, all we get are people saying, or other horsey people saying, oh no, my horse spooks at the cows in the field, in the farm, we better avoid them, or, we better get them used to walking past the cattle. So what is it like having a three-way relationship, and the fact that the horses interact with the cattle and work alongside the cattle as well?
Absolutely. It really is like a dance of three minds, I've heard it called, and it just adds such a cool dynamic element to the whole conversation. And so part of what we do in our clinics is we focus on practical experiences for people, and to take the better horsemanship that we're learning, even from our groundwork and our horsemanship clinics, and we want to introduce them to cows. We want to do some cattle work clinics, get some ranch-based experiences going for people. And we've done quite a bit of that, even in New Zealand on the stations. And, it brings purpose to the horse. It brings purpose to the rider, and that practicality. So when you ask your horse for a particular maneuver, or a stop or a go now, there's a very clear reason for it. And the horse recognizes that very quickly and can see the cause and effect of of what's going on with the cow or the group of cattle. And it just is such an awesome way to practice for the rider, to practice their riding and their communication from the saddle. And every interaction is different. Every time you ride into the herd or you box one out, it's different. And so you're getting the repetition in without getting repetitious. And that's one of the biggest things that I find, as people want to improve on things, then it does take repetition, but we end up drilling our horses to death, and we end up getting them soured in the arena or dull or fractious, depending on the individual. And by bringing cattle into the equation, it can just potentially change all of that. And it's like play, for your horse and yourself. It just shifts that whole dynamic.
And what makes for you, Ben, a great ranch horse?
That's a great question. I like horses that are forward and sensitive. I don't like them to be too sticky or dull. And I think they should be versatile. A good solid horse is versatile and athletic, maneuverable, solid, good bone, obviously good bone and good feet to cover rough country and cover a lot of miles, but most of all, a good mind with willingness and just try, where they don't quit you and they're always trying their best. They're just figuring things out and they want to figure things out. And so you might never do it, but you ought to be able to take one to a dressage test and never having ridden the pattern before, just go and see how you do. Right. Or take one to a working equitation show or endurance ride or whatever it is. They should be pretty versatile, and Tom Dorrance used to say, not that you would, mind you, but you ought to be able to ride your horse up a power pole or down a badger hole.
I love it. That is so characterful, isn't it? I love these sayings because they're always so quirky, aren't they? Absolutely brilliant, but totally illustrates the point. And, and we get there. Love it. I love it. Well, that's the thing with life. We need a bit of spice, don't we? When life gets dull, we need a saying like that to ignite the fire. It's absolutely brilliant, just genius, and just helps us on our way. And I've got to ask you, Ben, I was listening to your podcast again and I was like, yes, Ben, I feel you. You were talking about nice versus kind. And this is something I've always talked about with humans, because a lot of people will always say they want to, to meet someone nice, or they want, a nice friend. But actually, what does nice really mean? And I wanted you to answer that, Ben, and let us know your problem with the nice versus kind argument, because nice is often billed as being great, isn't it? And I don't know why, but I'm going to leave this one to you to fight this fight.
Well, nice is, I don't know, you could generalize it, I guess, but when it comes to horses, niceness could be viewed by the horse as weakness or lack of clarity. I call it wishy-washy, and you don't want to stir the pot. You want them to be your friend, so you're not going to, have many boundaries or be clear or consistent about things because you don't want to upset them. And like you say, the same thing could be said in our human relationships. At what cost does niceness come at a certain point, right? Whereas kindness is different than that, and I think more powerful than that, and I think stronger than that, where kindness tells you when your zipper is down. Kindness speaks the truth in love, right? Because the truth is what is the most valuable. And so to be wishy-washy with the horse is not kind, and they don't appreciate that. To be unclear about what your expectations are and what the boundaries are and it's not fair to the horse. It's not kind. And yet we would think we're being nice, but with some horses, you're going to become a doormat. With others, they're just going to leave you. Like they're not going to stick around, much less ask you what to do, when they're bothered. And so that kindness, I think, goes along with being a good leader, whether with humans or with
Yeah.
horses. It has to do with clear, consistent, open communication, transparency, authenticity. And there's that element of niceness, that we are nice when we're kind, but there's also elements of firmness and clarity and consistency.
And Ben, what are people coming to you at the moment for help with most commonly? What's the most common issue you're seeing with people and their horses at the moment, do you think?
Probably one of the most common things is folks that have probably been around horses a lot through their lives, but they've lost their confidence a little bit.
Mm.
And whether that's through having time away from horses and coming back to it, or whether it's they got injured, and had a wreck and they're trying to get back
Yeah.
to it. But it's a loss of confidence, and it's sometimes based on experience or lack of experience, but other times it's also based in lack of knowledge. And that's kind of where I try to help people, is to realize that with knowledge and better understanding, better communication, we can have more confidence because we start to see the outcomes. We start to change the outcomes so that it isn't this unpredictable thing as much. And you can ride your horse and you have some expectations and some clarity, and you can go out into new places or do new things. And yes, it's not all going to be just perfect, but you have this rapport going with this horse where you can connect with their mind and redirect their movement, and do more than just survive the experience, but actually begin to thrive or begin to grow, both you and the horse, through those new experiences.
And we see, don't we, when people's confidence are knocked, that's when we see them give up horses or move their horse on or take a step back
Yeah.
or just leave their horse out because it's easier that way. How do you go about,
Yeah.
Ben, rebuilding someone's confidence when they are nervous around the horse and when they do maybe something bad happened and they've got that vision playing out in their head? Can someone fully recover, do you think, after a traumatic event with a horse or an accident or a bad experience? And how do you go about putting back those building blocks and building their confidence when they are nervous and anxious?
There's a lot of factors there, and
Mm.
every situation is different between each individual horse and rider. There's certainly no cookie cutter answers there, but it needs to start on the ground, because if a person's nervous, most likely that's starting even before they get in the saddle. And hesitation is being communicated, and lack of leadership is being communicated in the groundwork, or even just being around them on the ground. And so if I can clear up some of that communication on the ground and help that person gain some confidence in directing that horse and moving his feet and being effective as a leader on the ground, that can start to rebuild that confidence. And it also starts to build that rapport between the person and their horse, as opposed to what had been going on with the hesitation and the lack of leadership. I had a lady come to me a couple months ago and start doing some lessons every couple of weeks, and she was an experienced dressage rider. She's no longer competing, but she's ridden a lot of years, and she got a new horse last July, and she had cantered on it when she went to check it out. But then when she went to canter on it again a few weeks later after she'd got it home, it kind of fell apart, and he wanted to really do an extended long trot, and then he kind of just got in the wrong lead, and it was just a mess, and it kind of shook her confidence a bit. And I think she'd been a couple of years where she hadn't been riding as much, and she's trying to get her fitness back, trying to get her confidence back. Older lady, not a young lady, but and so she came to me, and that was the first thing she said. She says, "I need some help. I know I probably need help with a lot of things, but this canter thing has got me. I'm not sure what to do about it." And I said, "Well, we're not even going to worry about that right now." And we did probably 3 or 4 lessons of just groundwork before I even had her ride. Okay. We got things squared away on the ground and got working through all aspects of our groundwork. And then we started riding, and I talked to her about how we're going to use the seat. She'd been a dressage rider, pretty upper level dressage rider, and she was learning things about how to ride it with her seat that she had never been taught or never understood in all those years, and just changed the dynamic of the way things were going. And she came to my clinic a week ago, and we got her cantering around. She cantered both ways several times.
Brilliant.
No wrong leads, no, running off at this big long trot and then stumbling into a canter. It was just smooth. It was just like another day at the office. And that's the way it should be, right? If it's this big deal, if it's this hurdle in our minds, then it's probably a hurdle in the horse's mind, and we set these ceilings up for ourselves and then can't get past the glass ceiling. And so anyway, I just say that to say that it's pieces. Everything's made of pieces. And so if through knowledge and better communication, we can increase people's confidence, even on the ground, then we just start putting those pieces in one thing at a time, make it simpler, isolate pieces and get it right, and then start to put things together.
I bet she felt amazing in that moment, Ben. How did it feel for you seeing that progress and her reaction?
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. If people will stick with it, that's the other thing too, is Rome wasn't built in a day. And if we've lost our confidence, or we've had a wreck, or we've got a new horse and we've been riding the same horse for 20 years and now you've got a new horse, like that's a big change. And people really struggle with that. They've got their deal going where they've got that old horse and they just know each other. They've got this rapport, and then they buy a new horse and it's like nothing, right? And they don't realize how much just happened because those two understood each other, and now it's gone. All these sorts of things. I'm excited about it when people will stick with it and we're able to see it through to a victory like that. I love it.
Yeah. It's one of our biggest failings, isn't it, as human beings? When things get tough, often it falls apart, or we give up, or we try something maybe that we're better at, or whatever it is. We kind of try and avoid those moments and those feelings, don't we? But we just got to keep walking through and keep ploughing on and see what can be achieved. Oh, Ben, we're running out of time, but I've got a few more questions before we go into the members zone. Ben, I want to ask you, what do you think makes a great leader as a horseman?
Consistency, clarity, empathy. Every horse is different, and you can't just assume that you're going to approach everyone the same way. But those words, I think, sum up principles, not techniques, but principles, right? And horses thrive with consistency. They understand that. Clarity has to do with, is our communication being understood? And so often it's not. So often the issues we're having are actually based in misunderstandings, miscommunication. And then empathy, like, where is that horse coming from? Why is he doing what he's doing? Why is he not doing what I want him to? What are his motivations? What's his perspective on this situation? Is he scared? Is he dull? Is he hungry? Is he lonely? What's he worried about? What's the deal, right? So I think that kind of sums it up, I think.
And I love that you say that actually there are no issues, it's all misunderstandings and miscommunications, because that allows for us to turn it around, doesn't it? Instead of thinking this is a problem horse and this is wrong, actually we're just not communicating right, and we just need to be more clear with each other and understand each other better.
That's right.
Which is so much more positive, isn't it? Oh, which I wish the equestrian world was more positive as a whole, like that, Ben.
There's no problem horses. There's only horses with people problems. And
yes.
That's something that Tom Dorrance used to say, and Tom called himself the horse's lawyer. He was the horse's lawyer.
Brilliant.
And, it's still true today. If we look at it as a problem horse, we've labeled it, We've given it a name. We believe that about the horse. But if we just say, look, this situation is built on not just one misunderstanding, but actually experience with a whole host of misunderstandings and miscommunications for maybe this horse's whole life. So this is not going to be just like flip the switch and now he gets it. It's amazing how quick they can change, a lot of them, most of them. But it still means that we have to change how we're approaching it. Because, if you keep beating your head against the wall and expecting a different result, I mean, that's the definition of insanity, right? You have to change how you're going to do something if you want a different result.
Ben, I could talk to you all night long. Thank you so much for joining us on Curious Equestrian. You're going to stick around and answer some members' questions in the membership zone, so listeners can join us there to carry on the conversation. But for those who want to know how they can join you for coaching, for clinics, for ranch tours, how can they do that?
Well, it's pretty easy. We've got our website, truewesthorsemanship.com. You can find True West Horsemanship on social media, and we share a lot of good, valuable information there. Our clinic schedule is up on the website. It's on the Facebook events as well. And we do clinics all over all the time, and a variety of clinics where it's not just in the arena and it's not just horsemanship. That's great. And a lot of people still need that. But if you're looking for practical adventure experiences, especially ranch-based type things, either with your horse or if you can't bring your horse, come on, let's ride. Let's take it to the next level, and your horse will thank you for it. Other than that, we've got our online video library and our online private community. You can see on our website as well, a place where we can all connect and support one another, virtual events, and again, that extensive online library. And then you mentioned our podcast as well, Life in the Saddle,
yes,
available on all platforms. So appreciate it, Anna Louise.
Ben, it's been such a huge pleasure. Stick around, we're going to go into the members zone, but thank you so much for coming on Curious Equestrian. We've loved having you.
Thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you so much for listening to and watching Curious Equestrian. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube so that you don't miss an episode and all that's coming your way, or you can subscribe to us on whatever podcast platform you listen. If you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, that would really help us to find lots more lovely listeners. And you can also follow us on Instagram @Curious Equestrian Podcast. We'll see you next time.